Hey, Dennis. How you been?
Good. Have yourself?
I'm doing all right. It's been actually fantastic talking with the team throughout the whole day about different parts of our system, like how we think about things at Unblocked. Obviously, how we care about our customers came out a lot, and all the things we do to make decisions that hilariously unblock engineers, but like in service of them. But first, I've just want to make sure that if someone's dropped into this convo, they know who you are. So could you just give a quick, like, who are you and what do you do here at Unblocked?
Sure. My name is Dennis Pilarinos. I'm the founder and CEO of Unblocked. I've been working on the product for about 3.5, 4-ish years now.
Yeah, amazing. And being the CEO and one of the founders, like what brought you to this problem space?
Sure. Yeah. The way I like to describe it is it's really a consequence of my own lived experience. So I started my career at Microsoft. I've been building dev platforms for the better part of 20 years. Microsoft, I was at the ground floor when we were building the Azure platform and started with a small incubation with a single machine plugged into a direct internet connection in my office to geographically distributed data centers around the world, right? So that was quite a ride at a time where the quote unquote bookseller had just launched S3 and EC2 as beta services. And we thought it'd be interesting to provide APIs for developers to call in the cloud. So started there and saw, Microsoft go from a standard SaaS or a standard like on-premise business to a cloud business. And that was a crazy experience. From there, worked in AWS. I was the first person to start the office here in Vancouver. And that, again, I think there's 2,500, 3,000-ish plus people. And I was AWS employee number one here. And so from there, started a CI platform called Buddybuild. And that platform was used by tens of thousands of developers, or tens of thousands of teams, hundreds of thousands of developers for mobile applications, iOS and Android applications. It was acquired by Apple. We went from inception to acquisition in 3 years, where I built a bunch of the cloud CI stuff that Apple continues to run today. And so through those series of life experiences, what I saw was that there was this gross inefficiency in the way that engineering teams get information. And you're really constricted and constrained by the amount of context that you have. My peer group, my peers at Apple, I don't think anyone had been there for less than 23 years. Whoa. Right? So as a new guy coming in, I didn't know how things worked or why decisions have been made or any of that kind of stuff. That's obviously an extreme example. Yeah. And going from, the ground floor to a very large organization where you get a ton of context and what the trade-offs were, why things work a certain way, any of those types of things. As an extreme example, at Buddybuild, right? That was something that you would see people join the team and really struggle to be effective because they didn't have all of that, context or all that background, that tribal knowledge that they needed. So we started Unblocked, our consequence of the frustrations I felt trying to do my job. I was like, this fucking sucks and I don't want to have to do it this way. There's got to be a better way, and it tended not to exist. And so we would build it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And we've already talked about it a few times. We've said the context word. So I've asked everybody and I'm going to ask you, what is context?
It's one of those things. We're recording this in December, and I think it's interesting. Times word of the year was 6-7, I think is what it was.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, this meme like 6-7 or whatever. And I'm pretty sure in second place would have been AI, or if you're in engineering, it's either prompt engineering maybe or context engineering.
Yeah.
It's certainly the ones that I've seen bounced about a bunch. Context to me, if you step all the way back, it's all the information you need in order to be good at your job.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it's interesting if people think about context versus experience, like what is the difference between those two things? But ultimately, if you think about the people who are most proficient at their job within a company, they have the most context. They know why things work certain ways, how they work, those trade-offs, those decisions. And, that's often, a synonym would be tribal knowledge, right? And so that's how I think about context. There's technical versions of that word as well. But to me, it's like, I find that there is a strong correlation between people who are well-respected and good at their job and the context they have about it.
Yeah. And how they wield it probably too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So throughout today, I've chatted with a bunch of different members of our team about the depth of the technology we work on and also just some of the breadth of where Unblocked shows itself in developer workflows. I'm curious because you spend a lot of time directly with our customers, like teaching, unblocking them. I'm going to say that at least 3 more times. But what were some of the aha moments that you saw on the face of our customers when they were interacting with our platform? What were some of those moments?
There's a couple of things. I am a product nerd. I have a strong technical background, but I love kind of these product insights or product learnings. One of my favorite stories, because it was definitely an aha moment for the team and for our customers, was actually based on this belief that we thought there's no such thing, just culturally, and we thought the product should have an opinion about this, that there's no such thing as a dumb question,
Yeah.
that you could benefit from seeing your coworkers' questions. And so by default, when people would ask questions as part of our Q&A platform, we would make those available for coworkers to see them. On occasion, we would have people reach out to us and say like, hey, you know what? Actually, I don't want my coworkers to see this. We're like, oh yeah, of course, that's no problem. We have this little eye icon in any of the input boxes.
Yeah.
You click that eye icon, you go into a private mode. That question is now strictly between you and Unblocked.
Yeah.
And people were, oh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And we're like, wonderful. And then over time, we realized that more and more people had been asking for this. So one day we decided to change the default behavior where we would make all the questions by default private, and the number of questions skyrocketed. It was like unquestionable. Like there was this point in time where the graph went up and to the right in terms of number of questions. And it was one of those things where, while there's no such thing as a dumb question, people don't necessarily feel safe or that they can ask questions in a judgment-free way. And so when you give people a way to ask these questions and get expert level responses in a very short period of time, what you end up with is the behavior that you really aspire to, which is like this ability to quickly get the context that you need to get your job done. And so that was definitely an aha moment for us as a product team, and we see it repeatedly throughout customers as they use the product as well. As the quote unquote CEO, whatever, of the company, I feel sometimes stupid for the questions that I have to ask, right? Like we have this font licensing mechanism that you have to put a key in your shell. I'm sure you've had to do that as part of your onboarding flow, right? I always I get a new machine or I change the shell, whatever it might be, and I always forget what the hell, how does that work, and how do we do that, and all that kind of stuff. And I would feel awkward asking this question because it's been answered 3 or 4 times. Yeah. Well, no, I don't. There's no awkwardness because I just ask Unblocked, it gives me the answer. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And I just move on with my day. I'm not, feeling uncomfortable about the potential of being judged by some of the very talented people that I work with, being like, this guy runs the company. He seems like an idiot.
Yeah,
anyway.
for sure.
Yeah.
But like, I enjoy that a lot because this touches like a bit on just like how humans work. And like, clearly you think a lot about this. I think that's why we are close to customers. We care about UX. We care about making good decisions on behalf of our customers. And throughout all of today, every single team member brought that up, like brought up the philosophy, the social studies we've done. Is there a sense as to why that is? Because I personally have found it rare to find that as like a part of a DNA of a company where it's like, there's just a broad knowledge. It's not just like task specific. Like they're the best React dev I've ever seen. They also care. Like there's just truly this, like where did that come? Like, is this a, bumbled up or something?
No, I think I'll speak to my personal predisposition. I am a person who's like very, very frustrated by terrible software experiences. I think it's a form of craftsmanship, and I think it reflects on your professionalism, what that experience is. I think the only thing that bothers me about using software that's not good is if we created it, right? That is like using someone else's software. And, any single day, you'll probably hear me cursing out one thing or another about how terrible it is. Just terrible decisions. If they are decisions that we've made, and to be clear, no one gets into a conference room and says like, what we should do? We should make this terrible UX where when you're trying to find a time zone, it's sorted alphabetically or whatever it might be, something stupid, right? As opposed to like, oh, maybe we bias based on where you are at this point in time, or any number of ways of solving these types of problems. But if it's something, so I don't believe people have bad intentions. I believe that people sometimes don't have high levels of empathy and don't have, high levels of curiosity. That's one of the things that we care a lot about, is making sure that people appreciate the craftsmanship of high quality software. And so as much as it breaks my heart to experience it when I use other people's software, it's basically a kind of almost a mortal sin if it's our own, because that's, almost exclusively in our control. I think the team feels very similarly. We want people, and, even vendors that we use, we expect to have, a certain level of experience with them. And so it'd be very unfair for us to demand that of the people that we work with and not offer it to our customers as well. But yeah, I think that's why. Like, I just think it's It's the kind of empathetic thing to do. Yeah.
No, it's incredible to see like people rally around like, any customer feedback, like moving towards it. I've experienced that in my short time here so far, which I've appreciated.
Yeah. It's, it reminds me every once in a while I get these like kind of crazy movie quotes.
Oh.
So, we get positive feedback and negative feedback, overwhelmingly positive, right? Like
Yeah.
you take a look at the metrics and stats or what have you, people love the product. There is a movie, I don't know if you remember the movie Rounders. Rounders is like a great poker movie.
Okay.
It stars Matt Damon and Edward Norton or what have you.
Okay.
But there's this one line where you basically lose the fact that like you can win lots and lots of pots and they kind of get lost in your memories or whatever.
Yeah.
But with like very precise accuracy, you can remember all the ones that you lost. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually very consistent with our team as well. When people write into us and say that we let them down in some way, that is something that is like seared into our consciousness that we place way more weight on than people saying, I love this thing, or if you take this away from me, I'm going to cry, or any number of these positive things. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Remember this guy? He said that he didn't quite understand this thing. We should feel terrible about that. Maybe it's a masochistic part of me or something.
It's a shame-driven development.
Yeah, yes. It's a shame-driven development. New term. Feel the shame.
Yeah. But I mean, it's great. Like, because again, like the one thing that we were talking through today in one of the conversations was about our code review. So we have an AI code review. The show notes will have links to everything, but like we are a context engine, and that context engine basically has a great corpus of detail around everything related to their company and like across all sorts of different knowledge spaces, including Slack, obviously the source code, et cetera, to unblock engineers. So our AI code review product, what I found fascinating was like the way we think about how many comments to put.
Mhm.
And like, I kind of want to know, you're an engineer, so like, where did your voice play into that? Like, do you like nitpicks? Do we not like nitpicks?
I mean, to me, like, I think about this. We have this thing, which is, I think even for the employees, and certainly the way that I like to operate is like, you can be loud or you can be dumb, but you cannot be both. And so that is, you probably haven't seen that in the employee handbook or whatever that we have, but that's kind of one of those rules.
Yeah.
And so it's like almost the anti-clippy thing, right? We would rather say fewer things, but have them be like bang on accurate and helpful, because those are the people that we like to work with. So I don't know why you would build software that operates in a different way. Like it feels disingenuous to how I think people like to operate and like to work and the people they like to work with.
Yeah. And so like part of that is like we have quite a platform forming, and it's based around this context engine. As we come into, as you mentioned, it's December right now. We're actually coming up against the end of the year, and now 2026 is almost upon us. Like, it seems like there's been a measured approach to the first thing we created and product we really brought to market was the Q&A, so question and answer platform.
Yeah.
And then we moved through, I think it was actually, there was a PR failure agent, and then that led to code review. Like, how did you think about stair stepping through that? And obviously the idea that if we have this context engine, like it can serve a lot of spots because we have our MCP server. Like, I'm just curious about how you saw that thread go, and then maybe we can tease a little bit about where we might be going.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two parts to it in my mind. One is, what are the problems that we feel are frictionful, and technology as it, state of the art technology unlocks the ability to like remove the friction from those workflows, right? Which is like, I remember there's a huge amount of pressure and hype to position the company as an AI dev tools company, AI this, AI that. And I was like, I don't know why you give a shit what technology we use underneath the scenes. Like, I have a very specific business problem, and that problem is alleviated by magic, right?
Yep.
Like, I don't know, do you care that we also use Postgres and that we use like TypeScript and Kotlin, any number of these technologies? We're not a TypeScript, Postgres, Kotlin company, right? We're a company that goes and solves these problems. I think it's pretty remarkable that we're in a place now where the technology is moving into at a rate at which you can solve problems that you couldn't otherwise. In the history of the company, we've been trying to solve this problem for a while, and we had a version of the product that actually worked a little bit, quite differently, I would say. And with the advent of LLMs, we're like, this is an unlock. And we were one of the, I would say, first teams to actually start thinking about how can we solve these problems by using this enabling technology. I'll tell you a fun story that most people don't know. I think if you look in the code base in certain places, it's still there. When we were thinking about naming the company, right? The original name, I remember talking to one of our investors who were driving down 280 in San Francisco, and we're bouncing around a couple of different kind of ideas. And we actually thought we would call the company Bother, which is, you don't bother me and I don't bother you.
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
so the domain would have been usebother.com. I think I might still own it, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. And so we thought that would actually be, it's kind of gets to the point, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, I don't want to have to bother my coworkers and I don't want them to have to bother me in order to get these things done.
Yeah.
So that I think is thematically kind of the approach that we want to take, right? Which is a Q&A platform or up leveling the quality of the tools or these AI tools that are now writing code, or this PI, debugging effectively failed triage or pull request triages as an example, or code reviews or what have you. These are all things that you have this technology now that allows you to do something that you could never do before in a very accurate, high value way. And I get my work done without having to be bothered, right? So I think in the code base, there's probably still a couple of places where it's like, our namespace would be bother or something.
But that, like, I mean, I love that because, like, it's fun because, especially when I think about our AI code review in the code review space, it's like, for a bunch of reasons, including security purposes, like a human still has to show up and weigh in on a code review before that thing makes it to main.
Yeah.
What I heard from the team too is with our focus on making sure that if we're gonna, like you said before, you can be loud or dumb, not both. There's a small number of comments, but they're very valid. They're like, this is a real bug, like a real challenge. And I think that actually reduces the amount of human time required on the PR because, again, if Unblocked's touched it, like there's a confidence there. And I've seen that with our early customers. Is that something that we drove at by, like, with intention, or did we notice this as a side effect in the pursuit of just being really accurate?
So think about it this way. Forget about AI, forget about automating it all, what have you. Think about the people that you've worked with. Did you like the person who weighed in only when they had something like smart to say and that was helpful? And think about, like, there's this kind of stereotype of like this strong silent type, right? Which is like they only say something, and when they say it, like, you should really listen because there's value in it. And then there's, typically earlier in their career, wants to chime in and have something to add at every single possible opportunity, right? And quickly you erode the trust that you have in that commentary, in that feedback. And so that's a very deliberate software design choice, right? A product design choice, which is like, software should be a personification of how people work, right? And I don't like working with people who just want to like yammer on and have very low value things to say. And so I think that is a theme that is, and culture that is shared by the entire company. And so that is, how it's manifested itself. Yeah.
I'm very happy we're called Unblocked because that checks a lot.
It's
like, that's the pursuit.
Like ultimately you want to get unblocked, right? You don't have to wait for something that can be solved for you, right? That just seems just grossly inefficient. I'm not a patient person.
Not evident at all. Another piece that we talked about, because it touched across a lot of different parts of just our product and our tool chain, is the Unblocked MCP. It's not so much about the fact that it's an MCP, but it's that you can bring the context engine to bear on the tool chain that engineers are adopting, like Cursor, Claude Code, Codex, whatever. I'm curious about your take on how that's helping our customers today, because you're the closest to them most of the time. And then maybe a little bit about where you see that space going, because, like, I think there's a lot of debate right now about the value and efficacy of MCP as just protocol. So maybe start with just like, how are you seeing our customers actually unlock something with that?
I distinctly remember one of our most recent engineers joined the team, super sharp guy, very like high intellectual horsepower, very eager. And I just can't imagine asking him to like go and implement a feature or fix a bug and be constrained to only looking at the source code. Nothing. Just like the only thing you look at is the source code. That is like setting him up for failure. I suspect he would quit because he's like, what are these guys? These guys are basically torturing me. And I thought the interview process was over. I don't know what's going on. That is the mental model in which I think about a lot of Claude and Cursor and a bunch of these tools because of their origin, right? The genesis of those tools was really to help with code generation. And so the context that they have and they're limited to was the source code. Now, people are like, great, now we're going to introduce information that exists in other systems, right? So MCP comes along. I've been in and around the protocol space for decades, right? Like I can tell you, web standards, like crazy, stupid, XML standards that are decades old. I'm sure you talked to Doug at some point. And like all protocols start off early and solve very high impact problems quickly right out of the gate. And then inevitably you start thinking about kind of hard problems. One of our customers said to me, the S in MCP stands for security. And I was like, that is well said,
Yeah.
right?
Silent S. It's great.
Yeah. It's a silent S. Yeah, that's a great way of describing it. So I think these protocols will evolve. I think they solved like meaningful problems and they've introduced other problems, right? So the state of the affairs that it is right now is those MCP interfaces to these systems return information that only gives you part of the information, right? It only gives you part of the answer that you're looking for. Most typically, answers to problems are not stored in a single silo of information. They're spread across a whole bunch of different ones. And more often than not, when it's spread across a whole bunch of different ones, often they contradict each other.
Yep.
Right. So the source code might say one thing, a Slack conversation something else, a pull request something this, any number of these different things. When you stitch them together, you can't square the truth effectively. And so Unblocked is really, really good at effectively creating a knowledge graph and understanding what the truth is for any given topic across all these different systems. So that when you expose that truth to those tools, it's like taking that engineer and again, movie reference, downloading, now know jujitsu, right?
Yeah.
Like the Matrix reference where you can quickly give them all the context that they need in order to be as efficient as possible, knowing how that organization works and the decisions, tribal knowledge, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And then in that, assuming they're in an IDE or their CLI tool, doesn't matter, but like it's in the moment of the intent of what they're actually trying to accomplish. They receive all the context that's required.
That's right.
It's amazing. And as we move into the future, like, do you see an evolution maybe at the end? Is it going to be the protocol layer or like in other ways that we'll be able to bring more of that context to bear? Because I know we have our API and like that's one way that some teams are like putting it in CI jobs. Like it's actually running. But like, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how do you see that shaping?
I don't know that I have a super strong opinion here. I think a lot of the context that we're surfacing right now is really based on static data sources. It's the source code, it's the Slack conversations, the Jira tickets, the Confluence documents, so on and so forth. And that is a good chunk of tribal knowledge. We're kind of tipping our hand for the direction in which we'll go. If you think about where we are in the AI adoption lifecycle, we are very like human-led and AI assisted, right? Like I poke the machine and it does something for me. Yeah. I think the wow moments are where you are AI-led and human-assisted. When something has gone wrong, the machine notices it, can reason about what to do to fix it, and propose that solution to you. Identify the issue and propose the solution to you, and give you the choice to actually go and resolve it. I think that's super, super interesting. And I think that's where we're going to spend a bunch of time in 2026. We've already kind of dipped our toe in the water with that PR failure agent, right? There's two things I think developers hate doing. One is writing tests, lots of tools to help you do that. The second is trying to understand why their build failed as they're trying to land their pull request. And so Unblocked is really good at doing a root cause analysis for why that's happened, leveraging that context engine to then provide a solution, a root cause analysis and a proposed fix so that like when something bad happened, in this case, your pull request failed, the machine is like, I can reason about all of this information across all these different systems to tell you how to fix this thing. Here's how you fix it. Should we go ahead and do that? And you click yes, and you move on with your day, right? That's a lot better than, manually digging through log files or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I actually know that a lot of customers are very grateful for it because it's like, again, and it's to the mention of like test cases. It's like, it's not fun to write a test case. Like it's not just a good time. Like, so it's sort of the same idea as like, it's way better to have this thing moving. And I find that they're able to, at least they tell me that they're able to like focus on higher leverage work or worry about something more, or actually go review an important pull request, like, or do the thing that's more impactful.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think like at the end of the day, all the tools that you use should be the end of like giving you the opportunity to work on something that's like more differentiated, higher leverage, right? Like, software or otherwise.
Yeah. And like, how do you see that arc? Because you mentioned like we may move into a world where we probably will, let's be honest, where it's like AI led and human, notified and assisted. What does that world of software engineering look like as it comes to bear? Because right now it's like we're in IDEs, we do stuff on local, like we ship around. Like, do you think there'll be more stuff happening at runtime in cloud? Like, are we changing like how this stuff is all architected? Or
I think, yeah. I mean, in my career, I've had the opportunity to see this transition from on-premise to cloud,
Yeah.
cloud to mobile. And I think that like, I've personally was skeptical a lot of the use cases around Bitcoin. So I don't think of that as like a meaningful shift in our industry. But like, I think there's no question that AI will fundamentally change the way that people work. And that could be as a software developer, it could be as a copywriter, it could be as a radiologist, a doctor, any number of these types of things. It is transformative. When I see this and the impact that it's had already, and honestly, it's infancy, I think all holes are it's like you can't predict it. You know what I mean? Like the way that people are going to work. I think it's like if you make any predictions, it's a wild guess. One of my favorite quotes is the best way to predict the future is to invent it, right? So like to actually go and create it. So I think that's what we'll try to do.
And like one thing that I also have noticed a lot and we really care about here and came out often was just the way that we respect user privacy as well as corporate privacy in terms of access control. Like, because we talk, obviously, if we have this great context engine with all the stuff in it, well, you can't give all that stuff and knowledge to every single employee for various reasons. And we work with like a lot of like serious enterprises. Did that come from, was that emergent as we talked to customers and you met the market? Or were you like, this is just going to matter from day one, like access of least privilege? Like, what was it that brought that out into the product?
Yeah, it's not our first rodeo.
Yeah.
So, in my career, I've been building high scale impact systems that have significant impact if they're compromised.
Yeah.
I've got some crazy stories.
The other podcast.
Another podcast, another day. At Buddybuild, right? We had cloud infrastructure that we would clone people's source code, pull it down into our infrastructure, build it, and then deploy the binary. And with companies like Starbucks and Wall Street Journal and New York Times, a whole bunch of all these apps. We could do all sorts of nefarious things if we wanted to. But you had to build the trust, and that trust was a consequence of like our experiences in AWS and at GitHub and Microsoft, any number of these types of places. Security, privacy, all of those things that people think are an afterthought. You really, I would say it's not impossible, but it's pretty darn close to try to bolt that stuff on after the fact.
Yeah.
So we built it in from day one. And that's a consequence, again, like if this lived experience, we have not a single security review from people who care deeply about their InfoSec and security privacy policies. Not a single one have we had an issue with. In fact, one well-known financial services company said it is the best security review that they'd ever gone through with a company at our stage. It's remarkable what people care about at points in time relative to some of the tools that they use and potentially don't necessarily appreciate what they might be giving away.
Well, I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want to make sure we get across that we haven't chatted about?
I don't think so. It's an interesting time in the industry, right? I think a lot of people are really focused on, I had a really interesting call with a customer this morning. He's like, yeah, I like code generation. I got it. There's a bunch of tools. It's cool. But like what happens left and right of the code gen, right? And so when he saw Unblocked and the role that we play, certainly within code gen, but happening left in terms of helping engineers get that context and to the right of, writing the code, I think that like there's a lot of room for people to improve their development lifecycle when they think left and right of just the code gen stuff. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out over the next year. Yeah.
So am I. I'm looking forward to building that future together. It's going to be a lot of fun. So
that's exactly.
we'll make it good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Dennis. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course.